Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going over the 8-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. We're all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players. And I cover other sports as well, including NASCAR and the NFL, which I have my NFL content posted for week 1. And I'm going to be going live for NASCAR this evening at either 5 or 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to come in, check it out, feel free to do so. But if you're going to come back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at ChrisPenal16 over on Twitter, CPen16 on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got 300 plus people. You can hop into the Discord chat and just get access to all the extra content that I put out each and every single day. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So, the bats, I'm pretty confident in the bats tonight. I think we can go back to Coors Field, and there's some other good spots as well. But the pitching, I'm a little bit iffy on the pitching. Last night we had 2 aces in Shane Bieber, Lucas Giolito. Those were kind of easy plug-ins. Then we had cheap options in Kikuchi, and I mean, I don't know, the pitching seemed a little bit easier last night. Today, it's like, I think you play Zach Gallen for the most part, but after that, it's kind of like a mixed bag, and I wouldn't say I'm overly confident in any of these guys, but I'm not really confident in any of the cheap pitchers either. Like, Reynaldo Lopez is facing Detroit, but, I mean, he kind of just sucks, so I'm not too confident in that. And if Lucas Giolito can only score around 15-20 points versus them, I'm not sure how confident I am in Lopez actually having a serviceable game. I know it's only a one-night sample size, but for the most part, he's been pretty awful this season. So I think the lowest I'm willing to go right now is Rich Hill. But before I get carried away, let's just start up top with Zach Gallen, 9,400. He's been one of the better pitchers in baseball this season. If I'm going to pull up his game log really quick, his last start was 11 points, which was his worst game of the season. But besides that, 28, 23, 19, 27, 21, and so on. He's been a very good pitcher this season. He also has the lowest implied team total against him on the slate at 3.6. He's a slight favorite and 6.5 strikeouts over in Vegas. And if we're looking at his overall stats this season, a 28% K rate, a 3.64 xFIP. Walks are up to 8%, but not that much hard contact at 31% and less than a home run per 9 innings given up. So I think Zach Gallen's fine here. Now, I prefer lefties versus Seattle as they have a higher strikeout rate and just lower numbers overall, and they've actually had some decent pop versus right-handed pitching with a 100 WRC plus, 247 batting average, and a 157 ISO. But Zach Gallen's a pretty good pitcher, and I'm thinking his talent's going to overweigh the matchup. And that's not to say the matchup's like bad or anything, but I would say it's kind of average for the most part. But Zach Gallen's our SP1, and you're probably going to get to him in cash games. Kyle Hendrix, 8,700. He's a fine SP2 or even an SP1 on this slate, facing the Brewers, and only 4.1 runs for the Brewers today. He's a slight favorite in Vegas and 5 strikeouts. Now, Kyle Hendrix is a pretty vanilla pitcher. He's pretty boring to roster. You know what you're going to get. He's probably going to give up a few hits, probably going to get a couple of strikeouts, more than a couple, going to get a handful of strikeouts, and he's going to give up probably a run or two for the most part. But it doesn't really kill you most nights, and with the way pitching is, you're kind of just rostering pitchers that aren't going to kill you. So I like Kyle Hendrix, and this is actually a pretty good matchup versus the Brewers. They are striking out quite a bit versus righties this season, and overall they've been pretty weak. 27.4% K rate, and 8% walk rate, and a batting average less than 200 as a team. 275 open and only a 68 WRC plus. So this is a pretty good matchup for Kyle Hendrix. And actually, in his first start of the season versus the Brewers, he did score 45 points versus them. Now that's a major outlier if you're looking at the rest of his games. He's been at 23, 22, 9, 7, 15, 21, 17. But he's only had one start where he did not, where he only had one start that really killed you, where he only scored -1 points. But outside of that, he's been fine for the most part. So I think Kyle Hendrix is a pretty safe, boring play on this slate. Then we have Zach Plesac at 8,000. He's yet to have a bad game this season. Just looking at his game log, he scored 21, 25, 27, 18, and 38, and he's having a very, very good year looking at the overall stats. He's got a 1.32 ERA paired with a 3.21 xFIP, but that's still pretty good at 27% K rate. His strikeout rate is up much higher than it was last season, and only a 2% walk rate. I love getting guys like a good control because that means they can go deeper into the games, and that obviously is going to give us a higher floor for fantasy purposes. And he's also gone deep in pretty much every single game. Looking at his pitch count, 98, 103, 95, 90, and 96. So pitch count's not going to be an issue here. He's not walking anybody. He only has 2 walks on the season. So I like Zach Plesac here. Now the matchup versus the Twins, I wouldn't say it's my absolute favorite. If you look at their splits versus righties, they got 100 WRC plus, a 321 WOBA, 191 ISO, 25% K rate, but Plesac's a pretty good pitcher, and also Max Kepler's not in the lineup, which is also a boost to him as well. So at 8,000, I wouldn't hate Zach Plesac as my SP2 on this slate. Then Rich Hill, 7,300. I feel like a lot of people might end up going the Zach Allen, Rich Hill route, which I get because we're going to need to spend down on pitching a little bit if we're going to want to fit in guys like Mike Trout, Trevor Story, so we're not going to be able to spend up too much for pitching today, but Rich Hill's okay at 7,300. I don't love using pitchers versus the Indians, and I don't think I've done that yet this season. And I mean, I am an Indians fan, so I might be a little bit biased there, and I know they haven't had the greatest offense in the world, but I think Rich Hill is going to be serviceable at this price tag. If we're looking at his games this season, he has had 2 bad games and 3 pretty average games, and that's all I really want at 7,300 is just a nice average game. He had 13 points versus Detroit, 15.7 points versus Cleveland. I will take 15 points all day at that price tag. Then -4 versus Milwaukee, but 17 versus St. Louis. I think he'll be okay here. I mean, if we're looking at his numbers this season, he only has 5 starts, but only a 17% carry, a double-digit walk rate, 4.92 xFIP, and a 38% hard contact rate. So I wouldn't say I love Rich Hill. I don't love the matchup. The Indians aren't a team that are going to strike out a ton. If you look at their numbers versus lefties, only a 22% K rate, but they're not walking a lot, and they only have a 109 team ISO, a 211 batting average, and a 65 WRC plus versus lefties this season. So I think Rich Hill is totally fine here. The matchup on paper is pretty good, even though I guess I don't love it because I guess I'm an Indians fan, so I guess I'm not going to love the matchup here for Rich Hill, but he should be okay. But that's pretty much it for the pitching. Again, it's not like a loaded pitching slate by any means. You're kind of just rostering guys that aren't going to get your lineup killed. But the bats are more fun to talk about. So let's start up top at catcher. We got Yasmani Grandal at 5,000. I mean, he's pretty much the top catching option pretty much any single slate that he's on. But I do like the White Sox today, not over the Coors Field bats, but they are totally stackable. I don't have many listed. I think I actually only have Yasmani Grandal listed, but you can certainly stack the White Sox. The only problem is they're just super expensive pretty much every single day. But they have a team total of 5.5, and if you're looking at Grandal splits, he's been better versus lefties, but still fine numbers versus righties with a near 200 ISO, over a 330 WOB, and a 114 WRC plus. Does strike out quite a bit, but I mean, Michael Fulmer's not a pitcher that I'm going to be too scared of, so don't mind Yasmani Grandal if you have the money for him. Max Stassi, I apologize, I don't know how to say his last name, but he's 3,000 in Coors Field if you're looking at his splits versus lefties this season. Yeah, it might not be the biggest sample size in the world, but a near 400 ISO, a 430 WOBA, 180 WRC plus, and a near 700 slugging with over a 300 batting average and only a 10% K rate. So Max Stassi, whatever it is, I think he's a fine play here versus Kyle Freeland in Coors Field. Always prefer righties versus him as well, but he actually has a higher WOBA to the lefties this season, so I think pretty much this entire lineup for the Angels is in play today, and looking at their team total, it's near 6, and they're also still pretty cheap for the most part. They bumped up Rendon's price, but outside of that, these guys are still a little bit too cheap for being in Coors Field, so you can certainly stack the Angels up once again. Then Tony Walters at 2,700. Look, catcher, besides Yasmani Grandal, pretty much sucks for the most part, so just fill in whoever fits at the end of your lineup. If you can get a cheap catcher in Coors Field, I don't mind it. Like last night, I wasn't really a big fan of any of the catchers, so I just went 100% Anthony Bemboom. Wasn't looking good until like the 9th inning or the 8th inning, and he hit a home run, and I was very happy because I had 100% Anthony Bemboom in 3 of my lineups, and I'd make 3 lineups per night for GPPs, and ended up working out for the most part. Then I had that Charlie Blackman grand slam, which really boosted me. But I'll save the Charlie Blackman talk for when I get to him. But anyway, these 3 catchers, they're fine, but whoever just fits your lineup at the end, I think is totally fine just plugging in. Dropping down to first base, we have Shohei Ohtani at 4,500. So he did pretty much nothing last night, and I don't like him versus lefties, but this is Coors Field. He'll see a righty at some point in the Rockies bullpen. But if you're looking at his numbers versus lefties this season, it's been pretty bad. He's got a high walk rate, but outside of that, a 0.51 ISO, a WOBA below 250, a 53 WRC plus, a 154 batting average, and a 30% K rate. He has been trash versus left-handed pitching. So I'm just hoping that the Angels get to Kyle Freeland soon enough, or he's going to face a righty at some point, and maybe you can get a decently cheap home run from Shohei Ohtani. But I think he's totally fine here. He's going to be eligible in the outfield as well. And Kyle Freeland actually hasn't been that great versus lefties this season either, with a WOBA above 350. So I don't hate Ohtani in Angel stacks. Josh Bell at 3,500. So first base is a position I'm probably going to end up spending down on just to be able to spend up on the expensive third baseman, the expensive shortstop, and like I'm pretty much playing Trevor Story and Anthony Rendon today, or you can go with Arenado as well, but also like some of these expensive outfielders too. So I feel like the spend down positions are probably going to be catcher, second base, and first base today. Then you're going to be spending up at third base, shortstop, and maybe 1 outfielder. But anyway, Josh Bell, he's cheap, he's fine, he's facing a righty. If you're looking at his numbers this season, he's been better versus righties. I wouldn't say he's been great this year, but he's striking out a ton at 30% clip versus righties. But a 140 ISO, 387 on base percentage, the numbers aren't too encouraging, but he's cheap enough going against Carlos Hernandez, who's not a pitcher I'm going to be too scared of here. So I think Josh Bell is fine at the price tag. Albert Pujols at 3,400. Going up against the lefty in Cal Freeland. It's Coors Field, so if you're cheap in Coors Field, you're pretty much viable no matter what the matchup is for the most part. And looking at Pujols splits versus lefties, it's not going to be pretty this season. But over the course of his career, obviously, I know he's on a major decline at this point, but he's always been fine versus lefties. So I think Pujols versus lefty in Coors Field, only 3,400, is certainly viable. Ryan McMahon, 3,700. He got that late home run last night, and he's going to be against Jaime Barria here. And the Rockies, once again, have the highest team total on the entire slate, making them pretty much the best stack on the slate, although the Angels are right there with them, especially at lower price tags. But McMahon, not the best batter in the world, but I think he's fine. He's actually been a little bit better versus lefties in the power department this season, but versus righties, look, he's striking out a 40% clip, a 152 ISO though, which is okay, but a 217 batting average and a very high ground ball rate, but it's just cheap Coors Field exposure. I don't really have to go too in-depth there. And if you're looking at his splits versus left-handed bats this season, he's got a 334 WOBA, ISO close to 200, and above a 20% K with a near double-digit walk rate. So, I mean, I just like the whole entire Angels, or not the Angels, the entire Rockies lineup here for the most part. Then going down to Adam Frazier, just really cheap leading off here versus a righty. I mean, his splits aren't going to be too encouraging. Only a 100 ISO, a 288 WOBA, 78 WRC plus, and a 240 batting average. But not a guy that's going to strike out a lot versus right-handed pitching, and he's just really cheap, and he's going to be leading off. So I'm pretty much just trying to find value here at second base and first base. I'm not going to be spending up for the most part. So Adam Frazier leading off, 3,200. He's fine. The Nicky Lopez, 2,100. He is dirt cheap. I think the Royals are also decent stack on the slate versus Trevor Williams. Trevor Williams is not a very good pitcher. He's not that great versus righties or lefties. So if you want to use some of these cheap Royals lefties in this lineup, I don't mind that at all. If you need some value, like Mondesi is pretty cheap, Alex Gordon's cheap, and even some of the righties like Hunter Dozier is fine as well. But, I mean, looking at Lopez's stats, it's nothing incredible in the slightest. I mean, looking at his numbers, he's got a 61% ground ball rate, a .059 ISO, a 67 WRC plus, and a 238 batting average. But he's near the minimum price, and he's fine, and the matchup's okay versus Trevor Williams. Now, getting into some more exciting plays, because second base and first base is kind of just your value spots, just kind of putting in whoever fits and hopefully in a good game environment. But third base, shortstop, and the outfield are definitely loaded today. But we'll start with Nolan Aronado. He comes in at a very expensive 5,800, but like the matchup here versus Barria, I think you can use lefties and righties versus him. And they have the highest team total in the slate at 6.28. And if you're looking at Arenado's splits versus righties this season, they've obviously been fine. Only a 9% K rate, a 224 ISO. 88 WRC plus is a little low, but a 259 batting average, and just overall it's Arenado in Coors Field, so he is certainly viable here. Now I prefer Anthony Rendon versus the lefty, but if you're stacking up the Rockies, you use Arenado. If you're stacking up the Angels, you use Rendon. And if you're playing cash, you probably go with Rendon. So that's my stance on those two guys. But Anthony Rendon, 5,400 here, going up against the lefty in Cal Freeland. Anthony Rendon is one of the best bats versus left-handed pitching the past few seasons, and I don't see why that's going to change today. Over a 300 ISO versus them this season, 161 WRC plus, a 558 slugging, and just overall very, very good numbers versus left-handed pitching. Cal Freeland's not a pitcher that I'm going to be too scared of, even though he's having a decent season. It's still Coors Field, and it's Anthony Rendon versus a lefty. So definitely going to be one of the top plays on the entire slate. And I think these guys are going to soak up the most ownership and by a lot. So I think Moncada here and Chris Bryant should be decently low owned. And if you want to get a little bit contrarian on this slate, you could play one of these two guys. But for the most part, I'd really like to play Arenado and Rendon. But Moncada, looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching this season, it's been fine. Over a 400 slugging, a 252 batting average, a 157 ISO, and a 377 on base percentage. Does strike out quite a bit, but I mean, the White Sox just carry so much power this season. They've been one of the best offenses in the league for sure. Michael Fulmer's not a pitcher that's going to steer me in the different direction. Then Chris Bryant here at 4,400 going up against a lefty who just does not really get much strikeouts. Brett Anderson is not a bad pitcher. He's got a very high ground ball rate. But Chris Bryant does crush lefties. And if you're looking at his numbers this season, the power's been down at 143, but all the other numbers check out. A 439 WOBA, 480 on base percentage, a 175 WRC plus, and a 381 batting average paired with an 8% strikeout rate. So I think Chris Bryant's fine. I like the price tag, but I'd really try to play either Arenado or Rendon if you're playing cash games. Then dropping down to shortstop, you have Trevor Story here at 5,800, who again is by far the best play at this position. I don't mind Mondesi at the price tag, but Trevor Story is just far and away the best play at shortstop today, so I think you're pretty much just making it a priority to get him in your lineups tonight once again, which is what I did last night. I went 100% Trevor Story, and I believe you got the double, the triple, which you got a little bit lucky on the triple, but it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, and I'll take it. But he's swinging a hot bat. He's been great versus lefties this season. He's been fine versus righties. The numbers versus lefties have been really, really good. But versus righties, they're still fine. 282 batting average over a 250 ISO. Just overall very good numbers. So definitely like Trevor Story here, despite him being very, very expensive. But I think you should make it probably a priority to put him in your lineup tonight. Then on Dalton Simmons, 4,500. He's fine if he's going to be leading off again. We'll see if David Fletcher returns. But he's fairly priced facing a lefty in Coors Field, so it's going to make him viable. Don't really need to get into the stats too much. It's just he's in Coors Field. Then Alberto Modesty, 2,700. He had a very, very good game last night. I do like lefties versus Trevor Williams. You've also been able to use righties versus him this season as well, so I wouldn't rule those guys out. But I don't mind Mondesi here. Now, his numbers versus lefties, he's actually got a 303 ISO versus them this season, which is a little surprising. But he's been pretty garbage versus the righties. But Trevor Williams is not a pitcher that, again, is going to scare me off of anybody on the Royals here. So Mondesi at 2,700. You get a little bit of pop, and you get a lot of speed as well. So I don't mind him at only 2,700. He's also been hitting near the top of the order recently as well. Then going down to the outfield, we have our two big hitters in Mike Trout and Charlie Blackman. If you can play both in a perfect world, you certainly go for it. But if you had to pick between one, I'm going to side with Mike Trout versus Kyle Freeland, just because he's the best player in baseball, but both are elite options here. I think if you have more Angels, you use Mike Trout. If you have more Rockies, you use Charlie Blackman. If you're in cash games, you probably just go with Mike Trout. But again, both are fine options here. Mike Trout's actually better versus right-handed pitching than he is versus lefties. Looking at his numbers this season, the numbers versus lefties, he's only got a 225 batting average and a 175 ISO, but to the righties, man, numbers are just so good. 330 batting average, 757 slugging, and a 426 ISO. And they'll see a righty in the bullpen at some point anyway, so not too concerned about that. And you get the guaranteed ninth inning at bats as well since they are on the road. So definitely like Mike Trout. Don't really need to explain why I like Mike Trout on any slate. Charlie Blackman at 5,600. He was huge for you if you played him in tournaments because he was only 12% owned in my 3-entry max GPP last night. And that Grand Slam really helped me out. I'm sure it helped you guys out too if you played him. But one thing I noticed is that Charlie Blackman has also been a little bit reverse splitsy with like Mike Trout is versus righties to the lefties. Charlie Blackman's been a lot better versus lefties than he has been versus righties. Looking at his numbers, he got a 487 WOBA versus them, a 508 on base percentage, 191 WRC plus, and a 464 batting average. Now versus the righties, the numbers are still fine, but they're not nearly as good as they are versus lefties. This is something I found a little odd. But Charlie Blackman's great versus either side of the either side of the plate, but either handedness from the pitcher. So I have no issues with using Charlie Blackman tonight, and the Rockies do have a higher team total on this site as well. And he's also $400 cheaper, so you can't go wrong with either. But if you had the money for Mike Trout, I would say just go with Mike Trout. Then we're going to skip everyone else in the expensive range and pretty much everyone else in the mid-range, and we'll go to these cheap outfielders just because I didn't like anyone in the mid-range for the most part. And if I'm going to be spending up at third base and shortstop in one of these expensive outfielders, Mike Trout or Charlie Blackman, I can't pay up for another one given that the pitching options aren't extremely cheap today. So I pretty much just listed a bunch of cheap Coors Field bats, and that's pretty much as in depth I'm gonna go on these guys. Like Pilar at 3,800, I prefer him versus lefties, but he's not a bad hitter. Going to be hitting in the middle of the order for the Rockies. Again, it's just cheap Coors Field exposure. Raimel Tapia, 3,700. Not a lot of power there, but certainly a lot of speed. He swiped a bag last night, and he's fine versus either side of the plate, and he's leading off for the top offense on the entire slate. So yeah, you got to have some interest in Tapia. Matt Kemp, again, prefer him versus lefties, but it's just cheap Coors Field exposure. I'm sorry that this is not in-depth analysis, but that's all it really is. If you can get a cheap bat in Coors Field and cash games, you pretty much just do it. But Justin Upton, I do like Justin Upton quite a bit. He's probably going to be a cash game staple here. He's going to be hitting near the middle of the order. He's only 3,000, and he's had some okay numbers versus lefties this season in the power department, but overall the numbers are pretty weak. But at 217 ISO versus lefties, the rest of the numbers are really down there, but I think he's fine at 3,000 in Coors Field. Kyle Freeland's not a scary pitcher. He's not going to strike out a bunch of guys, and Justin Upton, he's fine at that price tag. And again, it's just cheap Coors Field exposure. Joe Adell at 2,700. Once again, cheap Coors Field exposure. Just a righty on lefty matchup here versus Kyle Freeland. Then Alex Gordon is the bare minimum price tag at 2,000 as a lefty versus Trevor Williams. His numbers versus righties this year aren't too bad with a 145 ISO. 78 WRC plus is it's a little low, 209 batting average, but a 20% carry and a 10% walk rate. It's fine for the minimum price tag. You should be a little bit more expensive than that. So Don't mind Alex Gordon, but that's going to be pretty much it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. If you want to catch the NASCAR live stream at around 5 or 6 p.m. tonight, feel free to hop in, ask me all the questions, and hopefully we can do well for the bankroll for NFL coming up tomorrow. I'm going to check out of here. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and hopefully you have a nice night tonight.